first-time guest on the podcast. It's Robert Lawson, the author of the brand new book, Solidarity Forever, The Art and Soul of Stevie Van Zandt. Robert, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me, Eric.
I got to start out with your introduction. What a story. Great story of being backstage at an E Street show in 2000. And there's something called the Little Steven Trivia Game that seemed to break the ice with Stevie. Can you tell this story?
Yeah, I had a project in college where you had to make some kind of a trivia game. So I did a Little Steven trivia game. It was a life-size replica of a certain guitar that he used to play back in the 80s. You can see it in the Glory Days Bruce Springsteen video. So it was a life-size replica of that, and it had questions, and you move up the neck as you get questions right, and just real nerdy geek type stuff. So I played a couple rounds with Steven, and he didn't do too well.
He didn't know a lot about himself.
No.
That's great. And you met him for the first time back in 1984, right? On the Voice of America tour.
Yes.
And then later in 2012 at the Rogers Center in Toronto. Are you in Canada right now?
Yeah, I'm in Toronto.
Cool. Okay. You shared strong opinions regarding the box set of his solo material being worked on. That box set, by the way, Rock and Roll Rebel, the early work, would eventually be released in 2019. And you get a credit in the liner notes. So you're clearly a huge fan. When did you first become a fan of Stevie Van Zandt? And what was it that made such an impact on you? A song on the radio, a video on MTV, an album that you heard?
Yeah, I saw the video for the song, a song off his first solo album. The album came out in '82 called Men Without Women. And I saw the single or the video for the first single in February of '83. So that's a song called Forever. And when I heard it, it just kind of hit me. I knew who he was, didn't know too much about him. I mean, he only had the one album out. So, but that song really hit me, and I went out and got the album the next day, and it just really knocked me out. I just loved it. It's kind of brings together a lot of different parts about music that I love all together. So you got Stone's kind of guitar. He plays the Keith Richards 5-string G tuning a lot. Motown kind of horns, the vocals sound kind of like Bob Dylan, just all these things coming together just really hit. And then, yeah, the next year in '84, he put out a second solo album. I went to see that, met him. And after that, I was just like, obsessed, and he didn't put out that much music back then. So it was really kind of frustrating. You'd go a few years without really, you didn't see his name in magazines as much as, you kind of do in the last like few years. I think since 2017, he's put out more albums. Put out more albums between 2017 and now than he did in the first like 6 years of his career. So
yeah, isn't that amazing? The older he gets, the more he's doing. How familiar were you with his work with the E Street Band? At that time, he wasn't in the E Street Band in the early '80s. Or no, actually, he was right up until '84.
Right. So that's kind of how I got into him. I mean, I wasn't a Springsteen. I wasn't a fanatic or anything, but I was really into him, which is what made me watch the interview with him with Steven on TV where they showed that video. Because I thought, oh yeah, this is the guy who plays in Bruce's band. But I didn't really know, all the individual members as much as I would get to know in the '80s.
Before we get into when he first joins with Bruce, can you give us the brief story of Stevie's childhood years? He's not originally from New Jersey. Right.
Right. Born just outside of Boston. His parents divorced very early. His mother got remarried, I think, when he was 7 or so, to a man whose last name was Van Zandt. So that's how a 100% Italian American guy ends up with a Dutch last name.
Yeah.
And then
sometimes people confuse him with Ronnie and Johnny Van Zandt, Leonard Skinner. You get that a lot.
Yeah.
Not related.
No. No, he's not related to anybody named Van Zandt, actually.
Yeah.
Not by blood, anyway. But he, like a lot of kids at that time, he sees the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, he sees the Rolling Stones on television, and he gets really interested in music and starts forming bands. And once he kind of hooks up with a bunch of people in Asbury Park, just obsessed with music. And there's a whole period between like 66 maybe leading all the way up to like Bruce's first album when those guys are in like 25 different bands or something.
It's
They're
crazy.
constantly just mixing up, and you have the exact same number of, or the exact same guys in a band, except Steven is the lead vocalist. And then they change the name and Bruce is the lead vocalist. Or they change one guy out and someone else is the lead vocalist, or the drummer changes. And so it was this real weird New Jersey scene where just like a lot of young people playing a lot of music and playing with a lot of different people. They're all interchanging constantly.
Did you learn anything new in the process of writing the book about Stevie that you didn't know prior to starting it? Because that's a lot of research you got to do to get to the details of the early part of his career.
Yeah, and some of the stuff I was most interested in were those little areas. Like I have a lot of raw data because I was such a hardcore Steven fan for years. I don't know if you can see this whole filing cabinet.
Wow.
Just
So for those watch this on video on YouTube, guys, you'll be able to see it's a file cabinet. It's like you're a private detective.
yeah,
All the
right.
files on Stevie Van Zandt. Yeah,
Yeah, and a lot of that detective work is what I like the most. Like that's the most fun for me to find little areas that even I, as like a super fan, have always wondered about or real curious about. Of well, what order did that really happen in, or you know, something that maybe was never. I find it with a lot of these guys, and it's not their fault. But a lot of these rocker guys, especially once they get to a certain age, when they get interviewed by a lot of mainstream media, they just kind of revert back to telling the same stories a lot of times. So those are the stories they're comfortable with. They kind of know how they end, and maybe they have told the story so many times that they know the story more than they know the actual truth. So, sometimes people will ask me, well, did you interview, you know, like Bruce, or did you interview Southside Johnny? And that would kind of be cool, but I also like interviewing a lot of the guys that don't always get spoken to.
I hear you. Yeah,
And that's where I find like I get some little details that you usually don't really, hear about, So interviewing a lot of the guys from the original 1982 Disciples of Soul, that was really important to me. Interviewing guys from the 1989 very short-lived version of the band that a lot of people don't really know because that album didn't come out in North America. I like to kind of get in those little nooks and crannies a little bit and find out that kind of information. One thing that I found out that I was really kind of happy about was the that guitar that I mentioned from 1984 that he plays in the Glory Days video. He plays it in his own Out of the Darkness video. It's a Guild X82 leopard, like a black and white zebra stripe thing. That was actually Jean Beauvois's guitar. Beauvoir ordered it from Guild, and when Steven saw it, he loved it, so he bought it from Beauvoir. Um,
wow. Yeah, and that was an interesting name because John is famous for being in the Plasmatics, right? This is the
yeah,
same Jean Beauvoir. He was on this podcast because he put out a great book. So
yeah,
I didn't know he had a history with Stevie Van Zandt.
yeah. He's on the first two albums. He played bass on the first album and second album. By the 1984 tour, he switched over to guitar. So he joined Little Steven, I guess, right after the Plasmatics.
Yeah, interesting. How far back does he go in terms of meeting Bruce? They were kind of in the same circles there for a while. They're playing in bands in the same area, right?
Who's Steven?
Yeah, Steven and Bruce, and then eventually they're in the same band together. But did they
Yeah,
cross paths prior to that?
they met when they were like 15 years old, 16 maybe.
Yeah.
And right away they were in different bands. Bruce was in a band called the Castiles. That's his first band. And Steven was in a band called The Source, and he had a band called The Shadows. Um, and they would compete actually. Bruce and Steven on some nights they would play the same shows. Both bands would be a part of the same gig, so they got to know each other. Yeah, so that's like 1966. I
Goes
mean,
way back.
yeah. So then from there that's when they start playing together and they start hanging out at a place called the Upstage Club in New Jersey. So the Upstage was famous that bands could play um, like till midnight or something. Then I think they'd have an hour to clean up, and then they'd play again, and they could go all the way to like 6 or 7 a.m. And the thing that made the upstage unique, it was a non-alcohol venue, so kids being 16, 17 years old could play. So that's where you get Bruce, Steven, Gary Talent, Southside Johnny, just doing these jam sessions and just playing for hours and hours and hours and really honing their chops.
Steve, I'm sorry, Southside Johnny, he's important when you talk about the history of Stevie Van Zandt and Bruce Springsteen. There was a band known as the Jukes. So
Right.
when does that band form? And then talk about how they play a role in the early years of Bruce and the E Street Band.
Yeah, well, that's one of the bands that come from all these different groups that are changing members. Like when I said before that Bruce and Steven and all these guys would be in different bands, Southside Johnny is with them. He's the harmonica player often. He sings lead vocals on some of the songs. So you got all these different bands. There's uh, Dusty and the Brooms or something, Dr. Zoom, uh, Bruce Springsteen and the Friendly Enemies. That's a group that people don't really know about. So all these different groups. Southside Johnny and the Kid was an acoustic duo that was just Steven and Southside. Steven would play acoustic guitar and Southside would sing and play harmonica. So Southside gets in there pretty early, and there was a group called the Blackberry Booze Band. They kind of morph into Southside Johnny and the Asbury Jukes, and Steven becomes the manager, plays guitar, produces the records, sings background vocals. So if there are Springsteen or E Street Band or Little Steven fans who don't know the first three Southside Johnny albums, they're great records, and they really have that same sound. It's not unlike what Bruce did, and not unlike the first Steven album. Big horn section. Uh, Bruce wrote some of their material as well. So Southside Johnny and Asbury Jukes are a real important part of that whole scene for sure.
Yeah, and he wasn't in the E Street Band to start, as you know. It happens around the time of Born to Run. It's the song 10th Avenue Freeze Out. That's important to talk about. He just stopped by for a visit during the recording sessions, and then he notices the guys are kind of frustrated with the song. You could take it from there. That leads to Van Zandt's role in the E Street Band.
Well, when Bruce got signed, Steven was in his band. So that's an earlier kind of version of the E Street Band. And during the sessions for Bruce's first album, Greetings from Asbury Park, Steven kind of gets let go. The Bruce's management and the record company, they thought Bruce was going to be an acoustic guy because that's how they signed him. They saw him playing like coffee houses and stuff as he was kind of taking a break from band stuff and doing acoustic shows. So they hire him to be like a solo acoustic Dylan, and he comes in with, like a 7-piece band or something. So they figured an extra guitar player was too much. So Steven did record a little bit for Bruce's first album, wasn't really used. So yeah, so at that point he leaves and he's just friends and he's doing his own thing and he's with Southside. And you're right, he's visiting the New York City sessions for Bruce's third album, and the horn guys are not really getting the feel of what Bruce is hearing for the song 10th Avenue Freeze Out. And, the story that Steven barges into the recording studio and starts barking orders at these very respected session guys who are used to just reading, charts real straight, do your work and get out, get paid and get out of there. So Steven doesn't read music. So he doesn't even have like charts or anything. He just goes in there and he starts humming the horn parts to them. And that's the way he used to arrange horns with the Asbury Jukes. He would just like sing the parts to the band, which is really interesting because years later in 2017, I was at a Little Steven show during the sound check, and they were rehearsing a new song, and he was doing that. He was actually like singing the parts to the horns and to Eddie Mannion, who's like the horn director. And I was thinking, wow, he still does it that way.
Yeah,
Like
still does it.
he's still doing it the way that he did it during 10th Avenue Freeze Out in 1975
It's
or
awesome.
74.
That's
Yeah,
the Miami Horns. Is that
right.
okay?
Yeah,
Because his nickname was Stevie had a nickname Miami
Miami Steve.
Steve. Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now
So
all
anyway,
that.
during 10th Avenue Freeze Out, they realized it's like they had a problem because they couldn't figure out how these horns should sound. Steven fixes it because he knows how to talk to horn players. So he fixes it, and then Bruce is able to get him back in the band as second guitar. And after that, he's in the E Street Band for quite a while.
Didn't he have an influence on Born to Run as well? Wasn't there a part of the song Born to Run that he?
There's a guitar part in Born to Run, and what's interesting about that is for a long time, Steven wouldn't say specifically what it was. Um, I've got interviews with him in magazines saying, "Well, I fixed something in Born to Run, but I don't really want to talk about it because it's kind of embarrassing." And then now, all these years later, he talks about it in his autobiography, and I've seen interviews with him and Bruce together where they talk about it. And it was just something that Bruce was playing a chord wrong or something, and Steven thought it should sound a different way, and even Bruce maybe thought he was playing it that way. So
Right.
it gets a little techie for gearheads that it's that Bruce thought he was playing a certain way, and Steven says, "Well, no, but that's not the chord that you're." So they changed this little riff that's kind of in the middle of the song.
Yeah, I thought it might have been. Do, 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 do,
Yeah, I think
do, do, might have been that part because I remember watching a documentary on just that album.
right.
Yeah, he's quoted in the book talking about the first three Southside Johnny and the Asbury Jukes albums. That's 76's I Don't Want to Go Home, 77's This Time It's For Real, and 78's Heart of Stone. He said, quote, those first three albums were me just learning how to produce records. Then you follow that by writing, quote, these informal lessons would soon next lead to new production opportunities, including with his oldest friend for an early hero and eventually himself. Talk about those projects. One of them, a co-producing credit on The River.
Yeah, so he starts he got a production assistant credit on Darkness on the Edge of Town in 78. Um and then joined the production team for Bruce. So the E Street Band, their next project, The River, which took years for them to complete. They're working on that, and Steven is considered one of the producers of that. At the same time, they started working on an album for Gary U.S. Bonds. And Gary U.S. Bonds was this guy with like a lot of hits in like the early 60s or late 50s. And then like a lot of those early rock and roll kind of pioneers, Chuck Berry, Chubby Checker, Little Richard, Roy Orbison even, started playing like car shows and stuff. It's like they got supplanted by the Beatles and the Stones and all that kind of stuff. So they didn't have that relevance anymore. So Steven and Bruce end up co-producing. Although when you look at the credits, Steven produced more of it than Bruce did. So it's not quite a co-production credit, but I'm just nitpicky about stuff like that. But yeah, so they do a Bonds album. The musicians on it are the E Street Band and a bunch of the horn guys from the Asbury Jukes. So that record called Dedication also really fits in there. So it's like, if you like the sound of the river and you like the sound of Steven's first album, Men Without Women, and you like the Hearts of Stone, Southside Johnny album, to Gary U.S. Bond's Dedication album, that's right in that wheelhouse too.
That's one to listen to.
It's a great record.
Robert Lawson, the author of the brand new book, Solidarity Forever, The Art and Soul of Stevie Van Zandt, which is out now, today, October 17, as we record this. We'll get to more details on that. Stevie, he worked with Gary U.S. Bonds, as you mentioned. Gary became good friends with Bruce. And there's something we see in the video for Bruce's song Cover Me from Born in the USA that has a connection to Gary, correct?
Yeah, so well, from doing that album, they really brought Gary back from just playing car shows and state fairs and stuff like that. So he started getting played on the radio again. So Gary showed a lot of appreciation for that. He gave Bruce a brand new car, and you can see that car on the 7-inch single for the song "Cover Me," and very small on the car, it's written the word "Dedication." It's over like one of the wheels, I think, the front driver's side wheel, maybe. So yeah, they were really close for a while, and Gary would jump up on stage at a lot of E Street Band shows in New Jersey and maybe even in like Philly and areas like that. Bruce would join Bonds often, and they were very close. Stephen and Bruce did do a second album for Bonds, but at that point, the E Street Band wasn't really touring anymore. Stephen was working on his album. Bruce was doing a lot of recording, trying to finish his follow-up to The River. So there weren't really any opportunities for them all to play live again. So that album called On the Line, that album might have suffered a little bit because it didn't get that much promotion, but it's also a really, really good record. It's probably even better than Dedication. The first album, Dedication, has a duet with Bruce. So for people who are just like hardcore Springsteen completists, you got to get it just for that. You can also hear Bruce singing really loud backing vocals on a whole bunch of the songs. The second album, On the Line, has a duet with Steven. So it's like a rare opportunity to hear Steven do co-lead vocals at that time.
There was a project Stephen had called Little Steven and the Disciples. I think you mentioned that earlier. To talk about this, they had a critically acclaimed album and they played at the US Festival. That's a big deal.
Yeah, they did the US Festival in it was May 30th, 1983. That was a great band. That was a really great band. And he really built that band. So he's got the horn section from the Asbury Jukes. He's got the drummer from the Rascals. He's got the bass player from the Plasmatics, who had also played with Gary U.S. Bonds. Like he's not just a punk kind of guy. Really great band. Um, so they toured a lot. They started touring in the fall of '82, and it continued in '83, and then yeah, leading all the way up to the US Festival in May of '83. At that point, he did lose the horns and he kind of started a bit of a more stripped down sound for the rest of '83, and that takes us to his second album that came out in the summer of '84, Voice of America.
Voice of America in May of 84. Yeah, that's the same year Born in the USA album is released. Stevie co-produced Born in the USA with Bruce, John Landau, and Chuck Plotkin, and he does appear on 8 of the 12 tracks, but he left the band shortly after it was recorded. You write in the book, quote, although at the time nothing negative about Van Zandt's departure from the Springsteen camp was ever made public, decades later both men opened up about it. What did Stevie and Bruce have to say about why he left that split?
That was really interesting because I was following them both in '84, and there's lots of interviews where Steven just says, "Oh no, we're still the best of friends," and he wants me to do my own thing. And Bruce would say, kind of the same thing. He would dedicate a song every night on the 1984-85 Born in USA tour to Steven, and he would tell like radio DJs and stuff, you got to check out Voice of America. It's really important. It's a great album. So everything seemed okay. Um, and on top of that, I would say that it's important to know that during that mammoth 1984-1985 Born USA worldwide tour, Steven did rejoin the band 10 times just to play during the encores. So it's not like they were really never, like they didn't speak to each other for years. Sometimes some of the interviews kind of make it seem like that now, but they weren't that far. And Steven came back for the Glory Days video in '85. Bruce sang on the Sun City album, which was also that year. So they weren't quite as, like it's not like they hated each other and they never saw each other again. But it was only in current times, in Bruce's autobiography and Steven's autobiography, that they both finally address it. And they don't tell a different story. They both basically tell that Steven wanted to stay in the E Street Band. He wanted to balance being in the E Street Band and leading the Disciples of Soul, but he wanted more of an official place in Bruce's organization. So I think he wanted to not just be the guitar player and the co-producer. I think he really wanted to like kind of run the band, which he kind of did already in some ways. Because I know there are stories of like Bruce being late for a sound check or something, and Steven would run the sound check.
Wow.
Or if Bruce isn't, in the studio, Steven kind of stepping up and doing those parts. And that happens now. There's some photos just from last year of the E Street Band on tour, and Steven, it's like a little backstage area, and Steven's with the horn guys, and you can see he's kind of like helping them out with some parts. So he does do that kind of stuff, but he wanted some sort of a real official title almost, like musical director, I guess, maybe something like that. And Bruce just wasn't willing to kind of give up that much power. And Bruce liked the dynamic that he had because he would get some advice from his manager, John Landau. He would get some advice from Steven, and often it was conflicting advice. And Bruce talks about it in his book that he kind of played them against each other a little bit. Like he liked having them kind of being antagonists against each other, and then he would get the best ideas that way. Bruce does admit that that's not necessarily the best way to treat people, but it's the way to get the results that he needed, and that's the only way he kind of knew how to get them. So it's kind of a dysfunctional way of
Yeah, but that's happened. My favorite band is Van Halen, and there's no shortage of drama and tension there. And David Lee Roth used to say that was what created all that great music was the fact that Eddie and I couldn't stand each other.
I
It's that, you know.
I have a killer David Lee Roth story that I'll tell you when we get off the
Oh,
air.
okay. All right. Before we get to the 85 Sun City project, there is a story in the book about a Bob Dylan song that was produced by Stephen Van Zandt. That was ultimately replaced, though. This is an interesting story. Can you tell this one?
Yeah, that was a real fun kind of part too. So I'm a big Dylan guy. Like Dylan is kind of my guy, you know. The only reason I would never write a book about Bob Dylan is because there's probably already like 300 books about him,
Yeah.
and I couldn't, I don't know what I could come up with that would be original. So in 1991, I think Bob Dylan put out a 3 CD set called the Bootleg Series. So it's 3 discs of outtakes and demos and stuff that like nobody's ever heard before. And I remember being on a bus because I was going home from university, and I bought this box set. I didn't have anything to listen to it on, but I was looking through the booklet, and I see that Steven is credited with guitar on a song. I didn't know anything about that. It was crazy. So it's a song on Bob has an album called Empire Burlesque, and there's a song called When the Night Comes Falling from the Sky. So that bootleg series had a earlier alternate version that had Steven on guitar. So that was kind of mind blowing for me. So I always kind of wondered about that. Always, like how did that really come together? And Steven does talk about it in his book, but I kind of wanted a little bit more. So I talked to Steven about it, but then I also talked to Arthur Baker, who is kind of a co-producer for those Dylan sessions. And Arthur Baker produced the Sun City album with Steven as well. So hearing from both those guys, I got kind of a lot of information about those sessions. And it's just a really kind of neat thing that happened that, Steven's playing with like one of his heroes, but at the time he wasn't really sure if he was producing, and then the album comes out and they didn't use that version anyway. So it's great that it finally came out on the bootleg series. But yeah, the version on Bob's actual album is not the one with Steven.
How different are they?
They're pretty different. They're pretty different. The like you can really hear Stevens. He plays like these real big guitar chords uh, during it. Like he's not the only musician that's different. Like Bob was trying a few different things. It's definitely the same song. And since then, there's been another bootleg series that has like two more versions of the song, also with Steven. So it's just like a little area that was kind of fun for me because, like I said, I'm such a big Dylan guy. So just finding out more information about that because like I said, I remembered so distinctly buying that Bob Dylan box set and seeing Steven's name in there and just going, how did this ever happen? I've never heard of this. And then so you flash forward a few years and I'm talking to two of the guys from those sessions and getting really a lot of information.
It's a great story. Yeah, I remember the video for Sun City on MTV. This was a huge moment for Stevie. First, how did that project come to be, and who was part of it?
Well, he was doing some research for his third album, and he was really interested in the apartheid situation in South Africa. He went there on a research visit. He went there twice actually, and he just wrote this song, planning for it to just be another song on his third album that he was just starting to put together. And then somehow the idea came that maybe, this would be good if we had a duet. And then, well, this would be good if we had a couple people sing on it. And before you know it, there's like 40 different people on it. So Bruce, Bob Dylan, uh, Hall and Oates are both on it. Jackson Brown, Miles Davis, uh, a lot of jazz guys, and he also brought together a lot of like rap and hip hop guys. And that was when that kind of music was a little bit more still like New York City underground, wasn't quite as mainstream as it became. But he really brought together a lot of different kind of people. Ringo Starr is on it. Ron Wood, Keith Richards, like it's a Pete Townsend, like it's an incredible list of people. And the song, if you play it now, it's still pretty heavy hitting. Like
Yeah.
it still sounds it's very aggressive, but it's still very street. Like it's not like We Are the World to me is really a lot of kind of hand holding and kumbaya kind of, you know, it's a little too nice, a little too pretty.
Yeah. This had a little attitude,
Yeah,
a little
Sun
rock and
City's
roll
got
attitude to it. Yeah.
sure. I mean, the video of it has footage of like white policemen in South Africa, like beating like just black people trying to go to work or just walking down the street, like hard hitting stuff. So that was a big song. It increased a lot of awareness for the political situation in South Africa, but it also created a lot of awareness for Stephen himself, because all of a sudden he's being interviewed on political issues by like Time Magazine and Newsweek and stuff like that. He's being like really given a lot of attention because of this big thing that he really started.
MTV got behind it from what I remember. I was a kid, maybe 12, 13 years old, but I remember that being on quite a bit on MTV.
Yeah, it was a big deal. They did like an hour long kind of making of documentary, and that got played a lot. Steven and some of the other guys appeared on the Donahue morning talk show with one of the guys that runs the whole Sun City organization in South Africa, and they kind of debated it. To see little Steven on like 9 a.m. a morning talk show talking about politics, it was just, it was pretty crazy. You didn't really see
Yeah.
rock and roll people do that at that time.
Yeah. Before we get to his return to the E Street Band, because it would be 15 years, a long time. He left in 84, came back around 99. He did stay busy. He actually, it's funny because what did he say? He did nothing but walk his dog when he went into retirement in the mid 90s. But he did stay busy for a while there. He worked with Bon Jovi for a period there. You cover his projects during that time extensively. But he did admit later leaving the E Street Band was a mistake. He called it career suicide. Thankfully, he returned, but there's very little, if anything, about how that reunion happened. Maybe they were just friends all along and it was just a simple phone call like, hey, man, you want to come back to the E Street Band? But there's really nothing on that, huh? No stories about how they rekindled that relationship.
Well, again, I don't think they were really ever as far apart
Right.
as Steven makes it sound. And maybe growing up they were so close that if they just went a few weeks or a few months without talking to Steven, in his mind, it's like, oh, we didn't talk for 10 years or something. Like maybe it felt that way to him. But yeah, it wasn't really. Like I said, when you look at it, Steven joins the E Street Band 10 times on the Born USA tour. He comes back for the Glory Days video. Bruce is there for Sun City. Um, and there's, you would see them around town. There would be occasionally pictures of them like either in LA or in New York. So they were still doing stuff together. But yeah, Steven's doing a lot of other production jobs. Uh, and Steven and Bruce, well, there was they tried to do a E Street Band reunion around the Greatest Hits album, I guess.
Yes. Yeah.
They recorded some songs. So Steven was there for that, and then that didn't quite take off. Um, but
But
when
that's the thing. Yeah, Bruce in the 90s was doing his own thing. Anyway, he had his own band in the early 90s with Human Touch and Lucky
yeah,
Town. So he was
yeah,
already
right. But Steven actually joined that band uh a few times as
really
well at shows either in New York or New Jersey. Um, he just come out for like Glory Days and one other song or Darling County or something like that. So he was never really that far away, I feel, from Bruce.
right. There was a connection to the guitarist for Bruce in the early 90s was a member of a band that had some connection to Stevie. I'm trying to remember now.
So yeah, Shane Fontaine was the guitar player in a group called Lone Justice,
Yes.
and
Yes.
Steven co-produced a couple of songs and co-wrote a couple of songs on their first album. Shane wasn't in the band on the first album. For the second album, that band kind of changed lineup, and you get this guy Shane Fontaine on guitar, and Steven co-produced that whole album and co-wrote a bunch, and I think he played a couple of guitar solos, so he knew that guy, and yeah, he that guy became the guitar player in Bruce's other band.
Yes. I remember that. And I remember that band being on Saturday Night Live in around like 86. And there was some Lone Justice, there was some promise there. It's a good band.
Yeah, they were great.
So 1999, what a big year for Stevie Van Zandt. Before rejoining Bruce, he lands a role in The Sopranos. This all comes from his induction speech at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1997. Another great story. Talk about this. And then how the role of Silvio Dante wasn't even planned.
Yeah, so Steven has talked about this a lot, that yeah, he's retired, or he's what he thinks is retired, where he's not doing anything, and then all of a sudden he gets two huge job offers at the same time. Um, like why did that have to happen at the same time? But it did, and they made it work. So Steven's at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and he's doing this funny induction speech for the Rascals, who are Italian New Jersey rock band, or kind of pop rock group who had some hits in the mid '60s. Great band. They've got some great songs, and he was funny, and he was kind of being a wise guy. And David Chase, the creator of Sopranos, who at that time is still just putting his project together, happened to be watching it, and he sees this guy being a wise guy and being real funny, and so he reaches out to Steven. So even though there wasn't a part for Steven, and Steven's not an actor, he'd never really done any acting before. Although I busted him on that because I'd found out that he did do some school plays in high school
Ah, okay.
that he didn't really remember. Um, so he auditioned for Sopranos, and he got the gig. So around the same time, Bruce says he's putting together the E Street Band, and he wants it to include Steven as well as the two people who replaced him when he left in '84, which is Neil Slofgren and Patty Scialfa. So it's going to be a different version of the E Street Band, but kind of bringing together a couple different eras. So Steven had to kind of arrange. They would do a thing where if he's on tour somewhere and he has to fly, to LA, or I guess they actually did filming in New Jersey, like right after a concert, do a bunch of scenes, and then fly out the next day to be at the next show. And he was living that kind of lifestyle for a while.
What an amazing story, though, because he was coming up on 50. And it's just one of those things that we can all be inspired by. You just never know. Good things can happen like that. And sometimes you can plan things out, but sometimes something awesome will happen like out of the blue, just like
Sure.
that. Now, the I was mentioning Silvio Dante character was not planned initially. He tried out for Tony Soprano, that role, didn't he?
That that's what they say, and that just shows how early in the process it was, that none of the characters were really all that fleshed out. So he did audition for this Tony Soprano role. I don't know what that role was like at that time. It might have been pretty different than what it became once James Gandolfini got involved. I kind of would just think that it would have to. So it was probably a little different, but he went for it, and HBO were just not comfortable with the idea of a non-actor being the main guy in a gangster show. So so they created a new role for him, which was, yeah, Silvio Dante. Steven had the name, and so they make this nightclub owner kind of new character, and he's Tony's second in command, which is a role that Steven, knows really well from being with Bruce for
Right.
so long. And that's kind of the funny thing about it, that he ends up being like the number two in charge, whereas that's what he did
Right. Yeah.
in real life.
I love now Bruce when he introduces him on stage and they'll call him one of the Sopranos, or he
Sure.
just teases him about it. He's an actor, big time actor now, because he did do the follow up, the Lilyhammer series on Netflix after The Sopranos ended. That's a great character too, an ex mobster who's in the witness protection program. and he's relocated to Lillehammer, Norway. I never saw an episode of that show. Have you seen it? Is it good?
Oh yeah, I've watched
Yeah.
the entire. I
Is it
watched the.
still? It's not going anymore. Was it, or is it still going?
No, it's only 3 seasons.
Okay.
So yeah, so that's a brand new original show, filmed in Norway, where Steven is the lead guy. So HBO didn't think he could be the lead guy in Sopranos. He actually became the lead guy in a gangster kind of show. Um, but he was also a lot more involved with it. So he's involved in the writing and the and just the production and putting it all together. It's similar kind of to Sopranos, just in that it's a New Jersey or New York City kind of gangster guy who goes into hiding, but it's got a lot more humor to it than Sopranos did. Um, and of course, it's a lot of like fish out of water stuff because he's this, made guy from New York City. If you watch mafia movies, you know that kind of a character. But he's in the middle of Norway, so he has to, wear a big toque, and
Yeah.
he doesn't really understand a lot of the culture and the customs, and even though he's supposed to keep his nose clean as part of his witness protection, deal, right away he starts, doing weird stuff with his club and committing kind of petty crimes and
Yeah.
and being a boss,
Yeah.
basically. So it is very good. I like it a lot. Took me a little while to get into it. When I first watched it, I just thought, well, is he just doing another gangster thing? But I think it's different enough from Sopranos. And it gets kind of crazy by the end. He starts having some of his old Sopranos co-stars make appearances in it,
Oh, really?
which is a
That's
lot of
cool.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah, and you got to think this is not the end of his acting career. You got to think something else is going to be coming along. Maybe you already know. I don't know if he's got some some stuff in the works now.
I think he's going to do more of that for sure. I think he really enjoyed the creative side, especially with Lilyhammer, because he was so involved. Like he actually directed the final episode. He got a lot of his own music in Lilyhammer. So when you're watching an episode of Lilyhammer, you'll hear a little bit of Southside Johnny songs. You might hear a Springsteen song. You hear Gary Bonds. You hear all this music that he brought with him, as well as he did an orchestral score for the show. So you're hearing these big. It's like he does this neat thing where he adds his kind of stuff, which is like these big sweeping guitar chords, but he has a lot of like actual Norwegian musicians playing traditional Norwegian instruments, and he
Wow.
and he blends those into the score. Um, so I think that was something really something he enjoyed creatively, and I wouldn't be surprised if either a fourth season of Lilyhammer could maybe come back, or he might just do something brand new again. But I think he likes working with TV.
Yeah, he's a talented guy. And in 2017, he restarted his long dormant solo career. And you get into what sparked that return in the book. What was the reason for that?
Well, he had produced an album for Darlene Love, um, and that had a lot of his kind of early sound on it. He brought back a lot of his own musicians, and he played a couple shows with her where he would do like just three of his own songs. So I think that started a little bit. And then in 2016, he was invited to play this blues festival in the UK. So that was more of a formal thing. So he put together a new version of the Disciples of Soul just for that one show, and they did like a 2-hour show of all his old stuff, a bunch of blues covers that he had never done live before, and that was really the beginning of him restarting, the Disciples of Soul. And then after that, right away he starts doing a new album. That band starts touring all over the world. They do a live album. They do another album. They do, you know, at that point he was back.
You got to be loving this as a fan.
Yeah, it's like I think I mentioned, maybe I don't actually. One of the times I think it was when I was backstage with him when we were playing the Little Steven game, and he hadn't done any solo stuff in quite a while, like in terms of playing live or just really anything. And I asked him, "Are you ever going to do your own music again?" And he said, "Well, nobody but you would care." And
Well, I don't know
uh,
about that. There's,
yeah, so all these years later, all of a sudden he decided that somebody else other than me would care,
we'll
and he
give you credit for it then. He's he's being humble, but no, Stevie Van, yeah, he's well worth investing the time and listening to his solo work, because he's, like I said, man, the guy's got it's amazing skills as a musician, producer, songwriter, the whole thing. I mean, just, and we haven't even mentioned great showman on stage. I mean, he's just got that look. He embodies all that is rock and roll, and he's steeped in the history of rock and roll. He's got a radio show. I think it's still going.
Yeah.
Just has an appreciation for rock and roll going back to the beginning, and just he knows everything about all these artists and bands. It's just so cool.
Well, and he also has his own record label, which puts out music all the time. There's constantly new singles and albums coming out by all kinds of like young up and coming groups that sometimes he'll co-produce, sometimes he'll play a little guitar or sing a little bit on their stuff, but he gets a lot of new music out through his record label, and they play the stuff on the station, and they do they'll do these festivals sometimes in the States. I think they had one recently in Asbury Park, where it was just like 5 of his bands from his label, and they were all just playing in one night in a club.
Well, he'll be 74 next month, and he's as active as ever, obviously. What do you hope to see next from him as a solo artist, E Street Band, acting? What are you hoping to see next from him?
Well, we talked about there's some stuff that he was doing in the 90s when he says he wasn't doing anything. There's a project called The Lost Boys, and there's a couple of Lost Boys songs in Sopranos. So that's an album that when I interviewed him, we talked about that coming out, and he definitely wants it to come out. He thinks it's some of his best stuff. I've heard some of it, and it's really great raw rock and roll. Like it's his most Rolling Stone sounding album, but it's never come out. So I know he wants to work on that and try to get that out eventually. That would probably be one of the priorities. I don't know if he's going to do too many more like Disciples of Soul, like actual full albums and tours. He kind of indicated to me that he probably won't. But I would say getting the Lost Boys album finally out, that would be a priority for sure. They had a song called Affection, and it's on the second Sopranos soundtrack CD. And of course, you can hear it on YouTube, and it's in the episode where Tony he meets this car dealership woman, and right away he falls for her. And there's immediate attraction, and of course, right away they end up in a hotel room, and this song is playing on the radio, and it's a group called the Lost Boys, but it's Steven. And yeah, it's just a great raw kind of rock and roll thing. So I really hope that the Lost Boys comes out.
And he's touring with Bruce. In fact, they're coming to Toronto soon, right? They're coming next month, November 3rd.
Yeah, he's going to be here. They have 2 shows in Toronto early November. So on November 3rd, I'm going to be seeing him again and hopefully giving him his copy of the book.
Awesome.
We're gonna meet either before the show or maybe the day after or something. I'm not sure what the details are, but we will be meeting so that I can hand him a copy of one of these.
How awesome would that be? Yes. So let's get to that. It's out now as of October 17 when we're recording this. But if you go to Amazon, you won't see it there. But where can people go to find it? On the publisher's website, right?
So as of today, which is great timing for us to talk about this. As of today, it is available on the Friesen Press, their online bookstore. You can either search my name, or I think it's in the new releases area, or you type Solidarity Forever. It is there. A bunch of people have ordered it today. And then usually the Amazon Canada and Amazon US are usually within about a week after the Friesen Press listing. After that, you'll start to see it on like Amazon UK, Amazon Germany, France, then Japan will be a couple weeks after that. They kind of roll it out.
Okay.
They don't just splash it out on every international Amazon site. But the US and Canada, I'm hoping will be like within the next 5 to 10 days, maybe even sooner. When it is, I'll be posting it on all my social media for sure.
Yeah, on Facebook, you've been keeping the followers up to date on that. FriesenPress.com. I'm going to put that link up in the show notes. We've got to make sure we get the spelling out there, because it's FRIESEN press.com.
Right.
All right. So,
Let's double check that.
right. Yeah. Like friesenpress.com, friesenpress.com.
There
So
you go.
we'll put a
Yeah.
link to that. Yeah. Great job on the book. Great to have you on. Look forward to having you back on again down the road, Robert. Any plans for future books?
Hard to say right now. I don't think so. This is my fourth book, and this one took me like over 4 years to put together, although in some ways you could say I've been working on it for 40 years
Right.
when once you get the filing cabinet involved. So
Yeah.
I don't know. My priority, honestly, for the next few months is just to promote this one, to try to make sure as many fans as possible, of Steven, of Bruce, of Southside, of all those different things, that they all are at least aware of it. One of the things that really hit me that Steven said during one of our interviews was, he said, of all the things that I do, playing guitar with Bruce, radio show, record label, acting, my own music is what's most personal to me, and nobody really talks about that. So that's why this book is important. And so when he said that, I was like, okay, this is my priority. If this is important to him, it's got to be important to me. So I'm really going to spend as much time as I can just trying to get the word out, letting people know that if you're interested in almost anything in this guy's life, there's a lot of information in this book for you.
Well, I'd love it if you let me know. You send me an email how it went down when you give the book to Stevie. What his
Oh,
reaction is.
oh yeah, we'll be taking photos and
Yeah.
we'll make a whole circus out of it. I promise you.
Yeah. Well, you tell him the Booked on Rock podcast says hello. He's got a fan here.
Thanks a lot. Good talking with you, Eric.